What if the Great Fire of London had not simply destroyed a city, but created a completely new one? A London closer in spirit to Baroque Rome and Paris than to the cramped medieval capital it replaced. A London of sophisticated boulevards, wide piazzas. A London with a grand canal flowing through the heart of the city. In 1666, after much of medieval London burned to the ground, the scientist and emerging architect Christopher Wren proposed rebuilding the city almost entirely from scratch. England stood on the edge of creating one of the greatest planned cities in Europe, if not the world. This is Wren's London, the city that never was. By the 1660s, London was straining beneath the weight of its own success. The city's medieval streets were narrow and winding, packed with mainly timber buildings, many of them projecting out over the roads below. Open gutters and drains ran through many of the roads. Waste accumulated in crowded alleys. Vermin infested the homes of both the wealthy and the poor. To a 21st century visitor, the filth and foul odours of the old city would have been overwhelming. Yet not all of the capital was dirty, tangled and chaotic. Take Covent Garden. Laid out by pioneering architect Inigo Jones in the 1630s, it was England's first planned public square and a hint of what Wren would later envision. But salubrious Covent Garden was the exception. Most of London remained cluttered, grimy and time-worn. And lurking in the background lay two ever-present dangers: epidemic disease and catastrophic fire. Within the space of 2 terrible years, London would suffer both. The first of these cataclysms came in 1665, when bubonic plague swept through the city. The symptoms were horrifying, from agonizing fever to putrid bursting swellings in the armpits, groin and neck. Death came to a third of those who had the misfortune to catch the disease. By comparison, Imperial College London estimated COVID's fatality ratio in London's first wave at 0.9%, or roughly 1 in 111 infections. This means the London plague was around 37 times more lethal among those infected. Needless to say, fear engulfed the city. The rich decamped to their country estates, but most Londoners had nowhere to go. Entire households were sealed shut, left to their fate. Corpses were piled up and carried through the streets by cart. Trade and commerce ground to a halt. By the time the epidemic finally began to loosen its grip, around 100,000 people had died, roughly a fifth of London's population. The plague exposed the fragility of the old capital and its dense, airless neighbourhoods. But before London could even begin to recover, another catastrophe arrived. On the 2nd of September 1666, a blaze broke out at Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane, not far from London Bridge. Driven by strong winds and fueled by London's tightly packed timber buildings, the flames spread rapidly through the medieval city. The narrow streets that had defined London now trapped it. Fire leapt from roof to roof. Sparks carried across lanes. Warehouses filled with oil, pitch, and other combustible goods turned whole districts into tinder boxes. Londoners grabbed what they could, loading up their valuables on carts or burying them, many fleeing on boats across the Thames or through gates surrounding the old city. Attempts to create fire breaks came too late. For 4 days, London was a raging inferno. By the time the fire finally died down, much of the old city had been destroyed. Amazingly, there were few recorded deaths, but materially, economically, and architecturally, the disaster was immense. Yet in that devastation, an extraordinary possibility emerged. London could be rebuilt as a glorious, planned city. In the ashes of the Great Fire, architects, surveyors, and intellectuals began imagining entirely new visions for London, drawing inspiration in part from the designs of Inigo Jones. They included celebrated diarist and polymath John Evelyn. He derided London as a wooden, northern, and inartificial, meaning haphazard, congestion of houses. Evelyn proposed a deftly planned city of broad streets, open squares, and a riverside quay. A city shaped by reason and beauty rather than medieval accident. Like Wren, he admired the grandeur of continental European cities and recognised the fire as a rare chance to remake London. Their shared vision was a rational, spacious, and magnificent city. But Wren's more detailed plan gained the most traction. Already emerging as one of England's leading scientific and architectural minds, Wren came up with a design for a capital replete with radial avenues, vast piazzas, and monumental sightlines, converging on churches and civic buildings. A city of pomp and regularity, as he called it. For a time, Wren's proposal was admired, discussed, and taken seriously, with its most prominent backer none other than King Charles II. But London was not Paris, and Charles II was not Louis XIV, able to remake a capital by royal command. England's monarchy had only recently been restored after a civil war that ended with the execution of the king's own father. In France, power could speak with one voice. In England, it had to contend with many. Parliament, property owners, merchants, and the City of London itself. And those voices were not prepared to surrender the capital to a single grand design. Beneath the ashes lay thousands of property claims. Residents needed shelter. Merchants wanted their shops rebuilt. Time was of the essence. London just couldn't afford to pause for years while a perfect new capital was surveyed, redesigned, and imposed from above. And then there was the cost. Building a planned city from scratch would have been staggeringly expensive at a time when plague and war with the Dutch had left the country's finances in dire straits. In the end, much of London's medieval street pattern was restored rather than reinvented. But the fire still changed London. New building regulations introduced by Parliament in 1667 required safer construction in brick and stone. Streets were widened in places. The skyline was transformed by Wren's new St. Paul's Cathedral and the many city churches rebuilt under his direction. And while the architect's full Baroque capital never saw the light of day, its ideas did not disappear. Far from it, in fact. Wren's son and grandson went on to popularise the plan as a tantalising missed opportunity, and its dream of wide streets, monumental piazzas and processional views would echo through later improvements to London, from new streets to public piazzas like Trafalgar Square. The proposal even influenced the redevelopment of Paternoster Square around St. Paul's at the turn of the millennium. In 1982, the Sunday Times colour magazine commissioned artist Paul Draper to imagine what Wren's rebuilt London might have looked like had his plan actually been carried out. Created to mark the 350th anniversary of Wren's birth, the stunning illustration gave modern viewers a coherent glimpse of the London that might have been. The artwork incorporates many of Wren's churches in their proposed positions, alongside an earlier and different design for St. Paul's Cathedral. It remains the most detailed attempt ever made to visualise the lost city Wren imagined in the ashes of 1666. But Draper's illustration shows that city as a newly rebuilt 17th century capital viewed from above. What happens if we go further? What happens if we descend from that distant view into the streets themselves, reimagining not just Wren's immediate post-fire vision, but an alternate present in which his plan was carried out? Drawing on the surviving blueprint, together with historical maps, paintings, architectural references, and modern research, advanced AI reconstruction makes it possible to visualize the concept, not just as a design on paper or an illustration, but as a vibrant living city in photorealistic detail. Let's explore the London that never was. Here, along the Thames, the dense medieval waterfront has given way to broad riverside terraces and formal public space. At the centre of a riverside piazza stands the monument to the Great Fire itself. It was designed by Wren together with Robert Hooke. This brilliant scientist and surveyor also produced a post-fire plan for London of his own, opting for a rigid grid system. In the real city, the monument is powerful but hemmed in, a towering memorial enclosed by the busy streets and featureless tower blocks around it. In Wren's London, it becomes something different. Not a landmark partly hidden within the city, but the focal point of a splendid civic space. The fire is not merely remembered, it is seared into the geometry of the capital. Moving to the commercial heart of the city, Wren's London would have transformed the area around the Royal Exchange. Today, this is the world of Bank, Threadneedle Street, and the financial core of London. But in Wren's plan, the Royal Exchange stands within a monumental piazza framed by ordered Baroque streets. The building shown here is not the later neoclassical Exchange familiar today. It's the post-fire incarnation, completed in the late 17th century. The Baroque building was itself destroyed by fire in 1838 and later replaced by the classical structure now standing on the site. In this imagined version of London, the Exchange becomes the centrepiece of a sweeping commercial square, the largest in the east of the city. With its sophisticated symmetry, ordered facades, and carefully controlled vistas, the space resembles the piazzas of Rome and planned squares of Paris, such as the Place des Vosges or Place Vendôme, a chic mercantile focal point for the capital. In Wren's London, St. Paul's would have sat at the centre of a far more open and ordered city. This round piazza was envisioned to the west of the great cathedral. Fleet Street stretches away towards St. Paul's, with St. Bride's Church and its famous wedding cake spire rising along the route. Rather than emerging suddenly and unpredictably from medieval lanes, St. Paul's would have dominated planned avenues and ordered public spaces. One of the most intriguing proposals in Wren's plan involved the now subterranean River Fleet, which flows just to the west of St. Paul's. This is the proposed crossing linking Fleet Street with Ludgate Hill, which rises from the hidden Fleet Valley. By the 17th century, the Fleet was no romantic waterway. It was polluted and foul-smelling, basically treated as an open sewer. Wren saw the possibility of transforming the filthy ditch into something radically different. His plan involved widening, straightening and cleaning it up to create a grand canal roughly 15 metres wide. The Fleet might have become a key commercial waterway, drawing inspiration from the canals of Venice. It would have also acted as a natural fire break and a cleaner source of drinking water. In addition to the Fleet Street crossing, upgraded bridges would have traversed the river at Bridewell, Holborn and other strategic points. In this image, the bridge ahead represents the proposed Holborn crossing. The canal would have brought light, water, trade and movement into the western edge of the rebuilt city. But here, the story becomes more complicated. Although Wren's complete city plan was rejected, a scaled-back version of the Fleet Canal was actually built between the 1670s and 1680s under the supervision of Robert Hooke. It was intended to improve sanitation and commerce, but the improvements ended up failing miserably. The canal was underused and continued to collect filth, gradually reverting to a disgusting open sewer. From the 18th century onwards, it was covered over in stages until the Fleet River disappeared almost entirely underground. Elsewhere, parts of the city would have adopted more regular street grids, similar to what Robert Hooke had in mind. The dense unpredictability of medieval London would be a thing of the past, replaced by a more rational urban order. If Wren's plan had been built, London would have become a very different place. Better structured, more monumental, but perhaps it would have lost some of the layered irregularity that gives the real city so much of its character. Modern London is not a perfectly planned Baroque capital. It is older, stranger, and more chaotic. The ancient and the futuristic sit side by side. So do grandeur and grime, ceremony and everyday life, wealth and struggle. Wren's London might have been more beautiful, but perhaps also more segregated and sanitised. London's messy diversity is part of its charm, part of what makes the city unmistakably itself. And yet, it is impossible not to feel a pang of longing for a London laid out with such clarity and ceremonial precision. A perfectly balanced city of broad avenues and expansive piazzas. A city that looks closer to Paris, Rome, or even Venice. More than 3 centuries later, Christopher Wren's epic plan remains one of the most fascinating architectural what-ifs in history. A more orderly and elegant London, imagined in the ashes of the Great Fire.